Celine had learned long ago to make herself invisible. In a world where wolves were judged by the gleam of their fur and the strength of their bloodlines, her midnight black coat marked her as cursed from the moment of her first shift. While other Omegas in the Crescent Moon Pack boasted pelts of honey gold, silver white, or rich auburn, hers was dark as a moonless sky, and that single difference had defined every painful moment of her existence. The elders whispered that black fur signaled tainted blood, a mark of disgrace that no amount of submission or service could wash away. Children threw stones at her when she passed. Adult wolves turned their backs when she entered a room. Even her own parents had looked upon her with barely concealed shame, as though her very existence was an embarrassment they were forced to endure. She lived in the smallest cottage at the edge of pack territory, a crumbling structure that leaked when it rained and offered little protection from the bitter winter winds. Her days were filled with the most degrading tasks, the jobs no other Omega would accept. She scrubbed floors until her hands bled, hauled water from the distant well, and prepared meals for gatherings she was never invited to attend. The pack took her labor for granted, accepting her work while refusing her even the most basic courtesy of eye contact or a kind word. Celine told herself it didn't matter, that she had grown accustomed to the loneliness. But late at night, when the world fell silent, she couldn't stop the tears that soaked her pillow, or the ache that consumed her chest. She wondered what it might feel like to be seen as something other than a mistake, to have someone look at her with anything other than disgust or pity. The announcement of the gathering sent ripples of excitement through the pack. Every year, alphas from across the kingdom converged on different territories to seek their destined mates, and this year, the event would be hosted by the Crescent Moon Pack. For weeks, unmated wolves groomed themselves to perfection, practiced their most alluring behaviors, and gossiped endlessly about which powerful alphas might attend. The biggest prize of all was the possibility that King Cale Thornridge himself might make an appearance. The Alpha King was a legend whispered about in tones of both reverence and fear. He had united the fractured wolf clans under a single rule through a combination of strategic brilliance and raw power that none could challenge. Stories painted him as cold and ruthless, a leader who showed no mercy to those who defied him and no warmth to those who served him. He had never taken a mate despite ruling for nearly a decade, and speculation ran wild about what kind of she-wolf might finally catch his attention. Celine knew better than to harbor any fantasies. She wouldn't even be allowed to attend the gathering as a participant. Instead, she had been assigned to the kitchens, where she would spend the entire night preparing food and cleaning up after wolves who would celebrate possibilities she could never dream of claiming. On the evening of the gathering, she dressed in her plainest clothing and made her way to the great hall, keeping her eyes downcast as elaborately dressed wolves swept past her. The hall had been transformed into something magical, with thousands of candles casting warm light across tables laden with food and drink. Music filled the air, and the scent of excitement and anticipation was so thick it was almost overwhelming. Celine slipped into the kitchens and began her work, trying to ignore the sounds of laughter and celebration that drifted through the walls. She was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to be washed, when the entire hall fell suddenly, eerily silent. The music stopped mid-note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Celine froze in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, her heart pounding as she sensed the shift in energy. Then she heard it, the sound of heavy footsteps, steady and unhurried, and the rustle of fabric that spoke of expensive clothing and absolute authority. A voice, deep and commanding, spoke words she couldn't quite make out, and the response from the pack was immediate and synchronized as every wolf in the room bowed their heads in submission. The Alpha King had arrived, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the weight of his presence. Celine knew she should retreat to the kitchens, disappear before anyone noticed her. But something held her frozen in place. A compulsion she didn't understand made her lift her eyes, made her look toward the entrance where the crowd had parted like water. And there he was. Cale Thornridge stood at the center of the hall, and he was nothing like the monster she had imagined from the stories. He was tall and powerfully built, his body radiating a strength that needed no display to be felt. His features were sharp and aristocratic, all clean lines and controlled. Power, with eyes the color of molten amber that seemed to see everything and miss nothing. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the strong angles of his jaw and the cruel beauty of his mouth. He wore black from head to toe, the clothing clearly expensive but understated, as though he needed no adornment to proclaim his status. Power rolled off him in waves, an almost physical force that made every wolf in the room instinctively recognize their superior. Those amber eyes swept across the gathered crowd with an expression of cold assessment, clearly unimpressed by the display of eligible she-wolves who had positioned themselves hopefully in his path. And then, impossibly, terrifyingly, his gaze locked onto Celine. The world seemed to stop. Everything else faded into meaningless background noise as those burning eyes pinned her in place, and Celine felt something snap into existence between them, a golden thread of connection that blazed to life with such intensity it stole the breath from her lungs. The mate bond. She knew what it was, even though she had never expected to experience it, had never dared to hope for such a thing. Heat flooded her body, her wolf rising to the surface with a desperate cry of recognition and longing. Mine, her wolf howled. Ours. Mate. The look on Cale's face shifted, his eyes widening fractionally in what might have been shock, before his expression smoothed into an unreadable mask. But he moved, striding across the hall with purpose, and the crowd scattered before him like leaves in a storm. Celine's instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there like a fool, while the most powerful alpha in existence bore down on her. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as he closed the distance between them with long, purposeful strides. He stopped directly in front of her. So close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the intoxicating scent of pine and winter storms that made her wolf whimper with need. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression revealing nothing. Then he spoke, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. "What is your name?" Celine opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her throat had gone completely dry, her mind blank with shock and disbelief. She tried again, forcing the words past her frozen lips. "Celine," she whispered, the name barely audible. Something flickered in his eyes, there and gone too quickly to identify. "Celine," he repeated, as though testing the shape of it. Then he turned to face the assembled crowd, his voice ringing out with absolute authority. "I have found my mate. Celine of the Crescent Moon Pack will return with me to the palace as my chosen queen." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that was quickly stifled. Celine heard the whispers start. Immediately, voices layered with mockery and outrage. "The black-furred Omega? The cursed one? The Alpha King has gone mad. This has to be some kind of test. There's no way he actually means to claim her." Pack Alpha Marcus pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of confusion and poorly concealed horror. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "surely there has been some mistake. This Omega, she is not suitable for one of your status. Her bloodline is questionable at best, and her fur—" Cale's head turned toward Marcus with such cold precision that the Alpha immediately fell silent, instinctively dropping his eyes in submission. "Are you suggesting," Cale said softly, each word edged with ice, "that I am incapable of recognizing my own mate? That I require your guidance in matters of destiny and bond?" Marcus paled visibly, taking a step backward. "No, Your Majesty. Of course not. I merely thought—" "You thought wrong," Cale interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "My mate will be treated with the respect her position demands. If any member of your pack has shown her disrespect or caused her harm, they will answer to me personally." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable, and Selene saw several wolves in the crowd pale as they realized the implications. How many of them had thrown stones, hurled insults, turned their backs on her over the years? How many now faced the wrath of the Alpha King for their cruelty? Cale turned back to Selene, his expression softening fractionally. He extended his hand toward her, palm up in a gesture of offering rather than command. "Come," he said simply. Selene stared at that outstretched hand as though it might bite her. This couldn't be real. Any moment she would wake up in her cottage to discover this had all been some cruel dream, a fantasy conjured by a lonely mind desperate for connection. But the heat of the bond thrumming through her veins felt achingly real, as did the weight of hundreds of stairs boring into her back. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand in his, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity racing up her arm. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady, and he pulled her gently to his side. The journey to the palace passed in a blur. Selene barely remembered being escorted to an elaborate carriage, barely registered the stunned faces of her former packmates as she was driven away from the only home she had ever known. She sat across from Kale in silence, acutely aware of his presence in the confined space, of the way his eyes tracked her every small movement. He didn't speak, didn't try to fill the silence with empty reassurances or explanations. He simply watched her with that inscrutable expression, and Selene had no idea what he might be thinking. Did he resent the bond that had tied him to someone so far beneath his station? Was he already regretting his public declaration? The questions churned in her mind, but she didn't have the courage to voice any of them. The palace was magnificent beyond anything Selene had imagined. It rose against the night sky like something out of a fairy tale, all soaring towers and elegant architecture, with lights blazing in countless windows. The carriage swept through massive gates and came to a stop in a courtyard, where servants immediately rushed forward to attend them. Kyle descended first, then turned to offer his hand again, helping her down with a courtesy that felt surreal. A severe-looking woman in elegant clothing approached, her expression perfectly neutral as she bowed to Kyle. "Your Majesty, the blue suite has been prepared as requested." Kyle nodded. "Thank you, Helena. Please see that Selene has everything she requires. A full wardrobe, personal attendants, whatever she needs." Helena's eyes flickered briefly to Selene, and though her expression didn't change, Selene caught the flash of judgment in her gaze. "Of course, Your Majesty." Selene was led through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past rooms filled with treasures and beauty that made her feel like an intruder in someone else's life. The blue suite turned out to be a collection of rooms larger than the entire cottage she had lived in, decorated in shades of sapphire and silver with furniture that looked too expensive to touch. Helena rattled off information about mealtimes and protocols in a brisk, business-like tone, making it clear through her manner that she thought Selene wildly out of place. When she finally left, Selena found herself alone for the first time since the gathering, and the enormity of everything that had happened crashed over her like a wave. She sank onto the edge of an impossibly soft bed and buried her face in her hands, trying to process a reality that felt more like fiction. The following days proved even more difficult than that first overwhelming night. Selene was provided with attendants who helped her dress in gowns more beautiful than anything she had ever touched, who arranged her dark hair in elaborate styles and painted her face with subtle cosmetics. They performed their duties with mechanical efficiency, but spoke to her as little as possible, their expressions carefully blank whenever she tried to initiate conversation. It was clear they had been ordered to serve her, but felt no warmth or loyalty toward their new mistress. When she ventured into the palace proper, attempting to learn the layout and perhaps find the library or gardens, she encountered the court. The nobles of Kale's kingdom were a collection of high-born wolves who viewed her arrival with undisguised disdain. They watched her pass with cold eyes, whispering behind their hands in voices just loud enough for her to hear. "Look at her trying to walk like she belongs here. Did you see that gown? Wasted on someone with fur like soot. The king has clearly lost his senses. This travesty won't last long." The cruelest of them all was Lady Morgana Silvercrest, a stunning alpha female with a mane of silver-white fur in her wolf form and perfect aristocratic features in her human shape. Morgana had apparently been the favored candidate for queen before Selena's arrival, and she made no attempt to hide her contempt for the Omega, who had stolen what she viewed as her rightful position. Their first direct confrontation occurred in the palace gardens, where Selene had sought refuge from the suffocating atmosphere inside. She was admiring a bed of night blooming flowers when Morgana appeared with a group of her friends, all elegant, high-born females who looked at Celine like she was something they might scrape off their shoes. "Well," Morgana said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "if it isn't our little stray, tell me, do you even know which fork to use at formal dinners? Or do you just eat with your paws like the animal you are?" Her companions laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Celine felt her face burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to meet Morgana's eyes. "I'm learning," she said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. Morgana stepped closer, her smile turning vicious. "You don't belong here. Everyone knows it, even if they're too polite to say it to your face. You're a mistake, a cosmic joke. And eventually Kale will wake up and realize he's shackled himself to damaged goods. When that happens, you'll be cast out. And then where will you go? Back to whatever hovel spawned you." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing on wounds that had never fully healed. Celine wanted to argue, to defend herself. But what could she say? Morgana was only voicing the same doubts that haunted Celine's own thoughts every time she looked in a mirror or caught sight of her dark reflection. Before she could formulate any response, a deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Lady Morgana, how interesting to find you here." Kyle materialized from the garden path, his expression pleasant, but his eyes glacial as they fixed on Morgana. The alpha female immediately dropped into a curtsy, her confident demeanor faltering under the weight of his attention. "Your Majesty, I was just what?" Kyle interrupted smoothly, moving to stand beside Celine in a gesture of unmistakable support. "Just welcoming my mate to her new home." "How thoughtful of you." His tone made it clear he knew exactly what had been happening. Morgana's face paled. "Of course, Your Majesty. We were merely having a friendly conversation." "I see," Kale said, his voice soft and dangerous. "Then I'm sure you'll have no objection to continuing that conversation in my presence. Please do go on. What were you saying to Celine?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Morgana's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. Her companions had melted away, suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. Finally, Morgana managed another curtsy. "I apologize if I have offended, Your Majesty." "It won't happen again." She fled, before Kale could respond, practically running back toward the palace. Once she was gone, Kale turned to Celine, his expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" Celine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was mortified that he had witnessed the confrontation, that he had been forced to defend her like she was a child incapable of standing up for herself. Kyle studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Walk with me." They moved through the gardens in silence, the evening air cool against Celine's burning cheeks. Finally, Kale spoke. "Morgana and the others will test you. They want to see you break, to prove their belief that you don't belong here. You need to learn to stand up for yourself, to claim the power of your position." Celine felt a flash of anger cut through her shame. "Easy for you to say," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "You've always had power. You've never been treated like you were worth less than nothing." Kale stopped walking, turning, to face her with an expression of surprise, as though he hadn't expected her to challenge him. Then, unexpectedly, something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "I haven't. But you have that power now, Celine. You're my mate, my chosen queen. No one can take that from you unless you let them." But having the title and knowing how to wield it were two entirely different things. And in the weeks that followed, Celine felt increasingly like she was drowning in a world she didn't understand. Kyle was often absent, consumed by the demands of ruling his kingdom. And when he was present, he maintained a careful distance that left Celine feeling more alone than she had been in her cottage. He was never cruel, but he wasn't warm either. He spoke to her with courtesy, ensured she had everything she needed materially, but there was a wall between them that she didn't know how to breach. At night, she slept in her beautiful rooms alone. The mate. Bond thrumming with unfulfilled potential, and wondered if this was to be her life. A gilded cage where she had status but no real connection, respect demanded by position but not earned through relationship. The dreams started during the 3rd week at the palace. Vivid, overwhelming visions that felt more like memories than imagination. She saw herself running through ancient forests, in a form that was hers, but also not hers, her black fur gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. She saw wolves, with pelts as dark as hers, powerful and regal, standing in a great hall while others bowed before them. She saw battles and betrayals, saw her ancestors cut down by wolves they had trusted, saw the systematic hunting and murder of every dark-furred wolf until only scattered survivors remained, forced to hide or die. The dreams left her gasping and disoriented, and she began to dread sleep almost as much as she dreaded the waking hours. It was the palace librarian, an elderly Omega named Thomas, who finally gave her answers. Selene had discovered the library during her aimless wandering, and found it to be the one place in the palace where she felt something like peace. Thomas treated her with kindness, the first genuine warmth she had encountered since arriving, and he seemed to sense that she needed a friend. One afternoon, she worked up the courage to ask him about her dreams, describing the dark-furred wolves and the sense of ancient memory. Thomas went very still, his expression growing serious. "Come with me," he said quietly, leading her to a restricted section she hadn't known existed. He pulled a leather-bound volume from a high shelf, its pages yellow with age, and opened it carefully. "What I'm about to show you is not common knowledge," he said. "These histories have been suppressed, nearly erased from our collective memory. But I think you have a right to know." The book detailed the Shadowborn, a royal bloodline that had ruled before the current clan system existed. They were wolves blessed by the moon goddess with unique gifts, the ability to manipulate shadows, to draw power from lunar energy, to see across distances and through deception. Their dark fur was not a curse, but a mark of divine favor, and they had been powerful and just rulers for generations. But power bred envy, and a coalition of ambitious alphas had orchestrated their downfall, framing them as corrupted and dangerous. The massacre that followed had been brutal and complete, with surviving Shadowborn hunted to extinction or forced so deep into hiding that their bloodline was believed extinct. But it wasn't, Selene whispered, understanding dawning with cold clarity. Some survived. The trait remained in bloodlines, hidden and scattered. Thomas nodded. Suppressed through generations until most who carry it don't even know what they are. But you, Selene, you're not just a carrier of the trait. You're a true daughter of the Shadowborn. Probably one of the last with the bloodline strong enough to manifest their gifts. He closed the book carefully. Your bond with the king is not coincidence. Destiny has a way of correcting the mistakes of history. Selene left the library with her mind reeling, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. That night, alone in her rooms, she allowed herself to truly examine the sensations she had been suppressing. The shadows in the corners of her room responded to her emotions, deepening when she was afraid, retreating when she felt safe. She focused on a shadow cast by a candle and watched in amazement as it moved at her will, stretching and contracting like a living thing. The power was there, waiting beneath her skin, and it both exhilarated and terrified her. What did it mean? Why had the bond drawn her and Kale together? What destiny were they meant to fulfill? She didn't have to wait long for at least some of those answers. 2 nights later, Kale summoned her to his private study, the first time he had initiated contact for anything other than formal necessity. She found him standing by the window, his posture tense, staring out at the darkened grounds. He didn't turn when she entered, and for a long moment, the silence stretched between them. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with something that sounded almost like resignation. "I suppose you're wondering why I've kept my distance, why I claimed you as my mate, but have made no move to truly complete the bond." Selene's heart hammered in her chest. "Yes," she admitted quietly. Kale finally turned to face her, and she was startled to see exhaustion etched into his features, a vulnerability she had never witnessed before. "Because I'm cursed, Selene. My bloodline carries a affliction that has plagued my family for generations. It drains our power slowly, making us weaker with each passing year, until we eventually fade into nothing. My father died young, his father younger still. I've watched my own strength diminish year by year, felt the curse, tightening its grip. He laughed bitterly. I never intended to take a mate because I refused to inflict this fate on someone else, refused to create an heir who would carry the same doom. Then why? Selena began, but Cale continued as though he hadn't heard her. Because the prophecy that created this curse also contained its solution. The Shadowborn bloodline, bound by mate bond to my line, could break what was set in motion. When I saw you, when I felt the bond snap into place and recognized what you were, I knew you were my only chance at survival, at saving my kingdom from the chaos that will follow if I fall. He met her eyes, his expression raw with guilt and desperate hope. I claimed you out of necessity, Celine. I won't pretend otherwise, but I've kept my distance because I couldn't bear the thought of using you as a tool, of forcing you into intimacy just to save myself. You deserve better than that. The confession hung between them, painful in its honesty. Celine absorbed his words, processing the layers of meaning beneath them. He had chosen her, not because he wanted her, but because he needed her. The mate bond was real, but his acceptance of it had been driven by survival, rather than desire. It should have hurt more than it did, but somehow, the raw vulnerability in his admission touched something in her. At least he was being honest, not pretending an affection he didn't feel. What happens if the curse isn't broken? She asked. Cale's jaw tightened. I have perhaps 2 years before the degradation becomes irreversible. After that, my power will fail completely, and the kingdom will fracture. Without a strong king to hold them together, the clans will return to warring among themselves. Thousands will die. Celine moved closer to him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. And you think I can break this curse? How? Cale shook his head. I don't know the specifics. The prophecy spoke of shadow and light, of old magic, restored through union. I had hoped that being near you, allowing the bond to settle, might be enough. But nothing has changed. He looked down at his hands as though they belonged to a stranger. I can feel myself weakening faster now, as though recognizing the solution but not claiming it fully has accelerated the decline. In that moment, Celine made a choice that would alter everything. She reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his, feeling the mate bond flare too. Brilliant life at the contact. Cale's eyes snapped to hers, wide with surprise. Then we figure it out together, she said firmly. You chose me for whatever reason, but the bond is real. I feel it too. If there's a chance I can help you, help the kingdom, then we face it together. No more distance, no more walls. Something shifted in Cale's expression, the carefully maintained control, cracking to reveal the man beneath the king. Celine, he breathed, her name a question and a plea, stepped closer still. She, close enough to feel the heat of his body, close enough to see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. Show me how to break your curse, Cale. Teach me how to be what you need. What followed was a tentative exploration of the bond they had both been suppressing. Kyle began spending his evenings with her, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about the burden of kingship, the constant pressure of decisions that affected thousands of lives, the loneliness of power that isolated him from genuine connection. She told him about her years of rejection, about learning to find worth in herself when the world saw none, about the dreams that now made sense in light of her true heritage. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something real between them, a foundation of understanding and tentative trust. But their growing closeness did not go unnoticed, and it awakened enemies who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first attempt on Selene's life came without warning. She was walking in the gardens when an arrow whistled past her head, so close she felt the air displacement against her cheek. She dove behind a stone bench as more arrows followed, her heart racing with terror. Guards responded immediately, but the assassin escaped, leaving behind only a black-fletched arrow marked with a symbol Selene didn't recognize. Cale was furious, his control shattering in the face of the threat to his mate. He doubled her, guard, and launched an investigation, But no culprit was found. The second attempt was more subtle. A servant brought her tea, and something in the woman's nervous manner made Celine hesitate before drinking. She had the tea analyzed and discovered it had been laced with wolfsbane, enough to kill an omega within hours. The servant confessed under interrogation that she had been paid by an anonymous source, given instructions and coin, but never seeing her employer's face. The attacks created an atmosphere of paranoia and fear, and Celine realized with chilling clarity that someone wanted her dead badly enough to risk the king's wrath. The question was who and why. The answer came from an unexpected source. Morgana requested a private audience with Celine, an occurrence so unusual that Celine almost refused. But curiosity won out, and she agreed to meet the alpha female in a neutral sitting room with guards stationed outside. Morgana entered looking uncharacteristically subdued, her usual arrogance replaced by something that might have been genuine concern. "I didn't come to gloat or trade barbs," she said without preamble. "I came to warn you. There's a conspiracy forming and you're at the center of it." Celine studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. "Why would you help me?" Morgana's laugh was bitter. "Because I'm not a traitor, and I'm not a murderer. I wanted to be queen, yes. I thought I deserved it. Thought Kale and I would be well matched. I've been cruel to you because I resented you for taking what I believed was mine. But I would never kill for a crown, and I won't stand by while others plot regicide." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Lord Cassius and his faction believe that if you die, the mate bond will drive Kale mad with grief. They think a broken, weakened king will be easy to overthrow. Then they plan to install Cassius's son as the new ruler and return to the old ways, where power was determined by strength and birthright rather than unity." The information hit Celine like a physical blow. "Cassius is on the High Council. He has access to everything, everyone." Morgana nodded grimly. "Exactly. And he's not working alone. He has supporters throughout the court and the military. If you want to survive, you need to become stronger. Strong enough that killing you isn't an option they can afford to take." She stood, preparing to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm beginning to think Kale chose better than I gave him credit for. You have more spine than I expected. Use it." Armed with this knowledge, Celine threw herself into training with an intensity that surprised everyone around her. She worked with weapons masters to learn combat. She studied politics and strategy with Kale's advisors. And most importantly, she began working with an old magic user Kale found to help her unlock her Shadowborn abilities. The power came more easily than she expected, as though it had always been there waiting for her to claim it. She learned to wrap herself in shadow, becoming nearly invisible in dim light. She learned to sense deception, to feel the emotional resonance of those around her. She learned to draw on lunar energy, feeling her strength increase dramatically under the moon's light. As her power grew, so did her confidence. She began to speak up in council meetings, offering insights that caught the male alphas off guard. She made alliances with younger wolves who were hungry for change, who saw in her an example of merit triumphing over prejudice. She stood up to Morgana and the other nobles, meeting their barbs with calm dignity that was far more effective than any angry retort. And slowly, grudgingly, she began to earn respect, not because she was the king's mate, but because she proved herself worthy of the position through her own actions. Her relationship with Kale deepened in tandem with her growth. The walls between them crumbled night by night as they explored, not just the mate bond, but genuine partnership. He taught her about the complexities of ruling, valuing her perspective, and increasingly relying on her counsel. She challenged him when she thought he was wrong, refused to simply agree for the sake of harmony, and he seemed to appreciate her honesty after a lifetime of people telling him what they thought he wanted to hear. The physical aspect of their bond intensified as well, tentative touches becoming confident caresses, careful kisses becoming passionate embraces. The night they finally completed the mate bond fully was transformative in ways neither had anticipated. The moment their bodies joined, the moment they surrendered completely to each other, and the bond, power exploded through them both. Selene felt her shadow-born abilities surge to full strength, felt ancient magic awakening in her blood. But more than that, she felt Kale's curse shatter like glass, felt the dark energy that had been slowly killing him dissolve in the face of their combined light and shadow. He gasped against her throat, his body shuddering as strength flooded back into him, as the years of slow decline reversed in a heartbeat. They clung to each other in the aftermath, both crying from the intensity of it, from relief and joy, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely soil. But their enemies were not idle, and the time for confrontation arrived with brutal swiftness. Lord Cassius, sensing that his opportunity was slipping away as Selene grew stronger and Kyle's curse broke, decided to force the issue. He launched a coup during a formal gathering, bringing armed insurgents into the palace and attempting to seize control through violence. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, wolves shifting between human and animal forms as loyalists clashed with rebels throughout the palace grounds. Kale fought with renewed strength, cutting through Cassius's forces like a force of nature, but the traitors had numbers on their side. Selene found herself facing Cassius directly in the Great Hall, the old lord having targeted her specifically as the linchpin of his plan. "Kill you, and the king falls," Cassius snarled, circling her with a blade in his hand. "Your existence is an affront to the natural order. An Omega sitting beside a king, shadow-born filth given power. I will correct this mistake." Selene didn't bother responding with words. She let the shadows rise around her, let them coalesce into solid forms that Cassius's eyes couldn't quite track. She moved like liquid darkness, avoiding his strikes with ease. And when she finally struck back, it was with precision that spoke to hours of training. She disarmed him, drove him to his knees, and held him there with tendrils of shadow that responded to her will as easily as breathing. When Kale arrived, having fought his way through the chaos to reach her, he found Selene standing over Cassius's defeated form, absolutely in command of her power and the situation. Pride and love blazed in his eyes as he surveyed the scene. Together, they faced the remaining rebels, and the message was clear. The king and queen stood united, powerful beyond measure, and any who challenged them would fall. The coup collapsed, the conspirators either surrendering or fleeing, and order was restored. In the aftermath, Kale had Cassius and his co-conspirators tried for treason. The trials were fair, but the evidence overwhelming, and justice was served. The months that followed saw a transformation not just in Selene and Kyle, but in the entire kingdom. With Cassius's faction broken, Kale began implementing reforms that had been blocked for years. He elevated wolves based on merit rather than bloodline, opened positions of power to Omegas and lower-ranked wolves who had been systematically excluded. Selene became his partner in this work, using her own experiences to identify injustices and propose solutions. She established schools where young wolves could learn regardless of their rank, created support systems for those who had been marginalized, and worked tirelessly to dismantle the prejudices that had defined her own early life. The revelation of her shadow-born heritage became public knowledge, and rather than fear, it inspired curiosity and a reevaluation of history. Thomas the librarian helped her research and publish accurate accounts of the Shadowborn, restoring their legacy and correcting the lies that had justified their genocide. Other wolves with dark fur began coming forward, no longer afraid to show themselves, and Selene welcomed them all. She had become a symbol of change, proof that the old hierarchies and prejudices were not immutable law, but choices that could be unmade. Morgana, true to her word about not being a traitor, had fought against the coup and earned Kale's grudging respect. She and Selene would never be close friends, but they developed a professional rapport and mutual understanding. Morgana eventually found her own mate, a foreign dignitary, and seemed genuinely content with a path that didn't involve a crown. Before she left for her mate's kingdom, she sought Selene out one last time. "I was wrong about you," she said simply. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. This kingdom is lucky to have you." It was as close to an apology as Morgana was capable of giving, and Selene accepted it with grace. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and finding your true power, please hit that like button and leave a comment letting me know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more supernatural romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. 2 years after the night of the gathering, Celine stood on a palace balcony overlooking the kingdom she now helped rule, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their first child grew. Kyle came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking deep thoughts," he murmured against her ear. She smiled, leaning back into his embrace, thinking about how much has changed, how different my life is from what I ever imagined it could be. Kale turned her gently to face him, his amber eyes warm with love and pride. "You changed everything, Celine. Not just for me, but for everyone. You took a kingdom built on hierarchy and prejudice and showed us a better way." Celine shook her head. "We did it together. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Believing in me, supporting me even when I didn't believe in myself." Kale cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I claimed you out of desperation, that's true. But I fell in love with you because of who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your refusal to accept injustice, even when it would be easier to stay silent. The bond may have brought us together, but it's your heart that keeps me by your side." He kissed her softly, a kiss that still made her heart race even after 2 years of marriage. "I love you, Celine, my queen, my mate, the other half of my soul." Tears pricked Celine's eyes, the good kind, born of happiness rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. She thought about the scared, lonely Omega she had been, convinced she was worthless because the world had told her so. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and struggle and moments when she had wanted to give up, but she also thought about what she had discovered along the way, that true worth came from within, that power could be claimed rather than granted, and that love, real love, was built on partnership and mutual respect rather than dominance and submission. Their child kicked against her belly, a reminder of the future they were building together, a future where dark fur would be celebrated rather than condemned, where rank would be earned through character rather than birth, where every wolf would have the chance to reach their full potential regardless of the circumstances of their origin. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt, but Celine had learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined, and with Kale by her side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As the sun set over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Celine allowed herself to feel something she had once thought impossible: complete and utter peace. She had been the Omega everyone looked down on, the wolf with cursed fur who wasn't supposed to matter, but she had become a queen, a leader, a force for change. She had proven that destiny could be rewritten, and that the most unlikely love stories could become the most powerful. And as Kale held her close, their child growing between them and their kingdom spreading out below, Celine knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of their story. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more supernatural romance content. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of Celine's journey resonated with you the most. And don't forget to check out the playlist for more stories about mates, magic, and finding your true power. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.